What I'm doing now, I'm a portfolio manager for a family office based in Champaign, Illinois. We're an early stage investor, have about 60 active portfolio companies, as well as an array of early stage venture funds up through some later stage private credit funds. So good to see you all.
Hey everyone, I'm Sahil. I'm the founding partner over at Uncharted Ventures. My first job was actually a chemistry tutor in high school. I had a little hustle going on there, and then eventually started off on the dark side of venture capital after college. I spent some time working at some big funds, some smaller funds, and then went over to the operating side to go build out product over at Mapbox, a company that builds developer tools for location-based services. In the pandemic, I started my first fund with some former colleagues, doing a lot of early stage investments across B2B software, AI, and a lot of deep tech. And then I also spent some time over at Google doing M&A and VC for them, covering everything under the consumer web there, and a lot of the AI efforts that fell under Gemini. And now I'm a solo GP, investing in a lot of AI, vertical SaaS, some deep tech like space, energy, fusion, and more.
Thanks for having me, Christine. Good to see you. My first job, I was a fry cook in a casino in Reno, Nevada, where I grew up. And I learned so much about real life and business from a completely different perspective as wage earner, and it was a phenomenal experience. The most interesting job I probably had at that time, though, was after that I became a truck driver. So between undergrad and med school, I drove a truck for a summer, which was also incredible. So I run a venture fund for University of Florida. I'm also a venture capital partner at Deep Work Capital in Orlando, where I manage life science investing opportunities. And at Deep Work, we have our own core funds, as well as we manage the state of Florida venture capital programs, collectively known as the Florida Opportunity Fund.
Yeah, thank you guys all for being here. I'm just going to chime in too to introduce myself. I'm Christine Caven, and my first job out of college, I actually signed up to be an Uber driver. So I was driving people around as a gig worker. Today, I'm the Director of Business Development and Communications for venture fund PS27 Ventures, based out of Jacksonville, but I'm here locally in Gainesville. So I wanted to pass it out to the crowd today. Can you raise your hand if you're an entrepreneur or want to be an entrepreneur in the crowd today? Okay, that's a good number of founders sitting in front of us. So my question for the panel is, this is an investor panel. Every founder needs money. If you're doing well, you need money. If you're not doing so well, you need money. So what are some actionable steps that founders in the audience can take today to set them up for success when they're raising venture capital?
So I think, at least 50% of an investment decision is based on who you are as a person, right? And I think for me, that percentage probably gets greater and greater every year, I would say. So integrity, transparency, I think is super important. I think you don't have to have all the answers. In fact, nobody does. But you can identify the things that you don't know and be upfront about what you need to fill in. Because investors, or at least venture investors, will dig through, and you think if you're looking at 100 deals to get to 2 to invest in, you're looking for reasons to pass. You're always looking for reasons to pass. If you get to like, hey, they didn't tell me this, or you have suspicion about something, done.
I can go next. So just to kind of expand on that, I think, especially for early stage venture investors, you're taking a lot of risk on the person itself. You need the underlying technology to be good, but you need the person to be great. So we like to call it a bet the jockey, not the horse approach to it. And so, I think when you're pitching for venture capital funds, one of the things that you need to do is develop credibility. To Jackson's point, so that can be found in a number of ways. There's ways through your network where you can develop credibility. There's past experience. So one thing that is a initial green flag for us is if someone has done it before. If you have the experience of like raising venture funds and managing an expanded team and then going on and selling a company, that's huge for us. So that's a very initial green flag. And then I mean there's other ways. Investors talk to other investors and investors respect other investors. So when you see some of these tier 1 guys getting interested in a company, a lot of investors tend to follow. I think at the early stage, really that's with market validation in your product. So if you can take a product that you're building and get, real true interest in it, and, get people to pay for it, and especially get large corporate partners to pay for it, then that's also a very big check mark for credibility.
So I know you're a student entrepreneur, so tell us a little bit about that experience and also, your perspective now.
Yeah, I ran a couple businesses in college. One was a drone photography business back when quadcopters and hobbyist forums were taking off, well before DJI, unfortunately, although these mics seem to be great. And I think some of my takeaways being a student entrepreneur, or at least trying to raise capital for some of these ventures, comes down to two things. I think both the panelists talked a lot about the team, who you are, bringing your full forth credibility and integrity to whatever you do next. But I think making it very, very tangible for those who are starting off here. You might not have access to capital connects, friends and family who can invest. I think it really comes down to a couple things here. I think how you design your pitch, really sell who you are and why you think this science experiment that you're about to embark on could work, and how you're de-risking it really plays a huge role in terms of understanding where you're coming from, what you're bringing to the table, and why you're uniquely suited to win out there. I also think the two other factors that often come into play are timing and the market you're choosing to go after. The former, you really don't have much control over. Sometimes you just are way too early. But as far as the latter, I think it's really about picking the battles where you think you are uniquely suited to win, or at least have a disproportionate advantage over the incumbents. A lot of big tech companies out there have infinite resources when it comes to scaling. But one of their biggest challenges is that they're often hamstrung politically in terms of launching new products, whether it's legal, internal political battles, or just thinking about their own distribution wedges out there. So I encourage you all to get creative.
So I would say, you mentioned about, if you're a 3-time exited entrepreneur, you made all this money for investors, yeah, you're going to have no trouble. It's easier to raise $100 million than it is the first million, right? So how do you do the first million? And I think raising capital to me is those sort of like dominoes, right? The capital is going to go in, it's going to tick over all the dominoes, and investors think the last domino is when return on their investment comes. So if you kind of think through that from the investor point of view, you can kind of bake that into your timeline and your pitch. How much capital is going to need to be raised at what valuation range to get to the investor exit, right? Because you're sort of looking at time and money then, right? So investors will take a smaller exit with a quick time, but if it's going to take 8 years, or 10 years for a drug, let's say, the payoff at the end's got to be massive, right? So figuring that into how you pitch to investors and kind of understanding who you're pitching to, right? If you're pitching to a fund that's in year 6 of a 10-year life cycle fund, they don't have 10 more years, right? They have 4 years to get to that exit. So kind of understand the audience and what they're thinking.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Sorry if I can expand on it just a bit. Just to like that's a very good point in terms of like who your audience is going to be. For us particularly, we're we are more of a generalist investor, and we're a family office, and I'm working on behalf of a high net worth individual. So it's really what he finds interesting and compelling, but more so what is going to give a return for him. So you'd be shocked at how many times we go into pitches with companies where we ask the question, okay, when's the return going to come, and how do you see that happening? And it's a pre-revenue company, and there's not an MVP, and they're like, oh well, we want an IPO in 10 years. And it's like, well, okay, that's nice, but that's that's hard for us to believe at this point. So what do you see as a reasonable timeline for an investor coming in who's investing their hard-earned money that they built over decades to invest money into your company?
I would also like another thing that just, I don't know if this makes your eyes roll, but this is a $20 billion market, and if we just get 5%, it's like that's not a good part of the pitch, right? So there's got to be a lot more tactical involvement, because if you can get to 5%, why can't you get to 50%, right? So.
Right.
I mean, I never like seeing $1 trillion TAM slides on the pitch deck. But I think another way of looking at this, I think building off of what Jackson just mentioned, I think really understanding who your investors are and what their incentives are and where they align and diverge is huge for founders. I think at the earliest stages, understanding what valuation you set or what valuation cap you might entertain on a safe really dictates kind of what options you might have going forward. As soon as you raise that first check from investors, the timer starts. And you're likely going to be then raising in 12 to 18 month increments or longer if you're in hardware or something building for the physical world. So I encourage you all to think around who you're partnering up with, because these marriages are for a very long time, perhaps even longer than the average American marriage out there these days. So really be mindful about who you're working with, their values, and have they seen it through with a lot of their portfolio companies, or do they become a lot more antagonistic at the first sign of trouble?
That's a really great point. Thank you for bringing up the importance of values when it comes to matching with an investor. I think that, at PS27, we always make sure we spend time with the founders, do due diligence, get to know them. We ask them questions like, why are you doing this? What's the passion and what's the drive behind the business? Because if it's just to make money, there are a lot of things that you can do just to make money. It's a better investment if there's a mission and a purpose behind the company. I did want to ask, since we are at the University of Florida, and Jackson, you're with UF Ventures. If I'm a Gator, does that mean you'll invest in me, or like?
First time ever UF started a venture fund. They brought me on board to put it together. This was 2020, we started investing. It's a small fund, it's only $2 million a year. We've done 14 investments, and our check size is $500,000. We need a lead investor in place to invest. Since that time, so 2020 vintage year fund, when we compare across the country, we're in the 95th percentile performance, right? IRR is 42%, so, pretty good. We've returned all the money that's been invested has been returned in cash already. So performance has been phenomenal, honestly, it really has. So why is that? What's our unique advantage, I think, is that we have such deep access to so many experts in different fields, and we can get a really good idea around intellectual property. I think that's been very helpful. So now I'm trying to get more money from the board of trustees to create what I'm calling Gator Fund 1, which would be a $50 million fund. And we would broaden it out to, right now we can only invest in companies that have a license from the university. We want to expand that charter to be, alumni, faculty, students, et cetera, right? So working on that.
Yeah, so for the students in the room, step one, go to the tech transfer office, get a license, then you're eligible right now for UFF.
Right, so our investing is really based on some sort of IP that's at UF. That can be as simple as a trademark license, though. There's probably something on the shelf here for everyone. If you think that, you don't qualify because you don't have any intellectual property, there's so much software that can apply to generically to so many businesses that you could probably find something.
Absolutely, and I know that other organizations like NASA also have a tech transfer office as well, where these ideas are basically sitting on the shelf waiting for a leadership team to kind of come in and own the product of the company and make the business happen. Brian, I want to go back to something you said just a minute ago, which is bet the jockey, not the horse. And that's something that I hear from a lot of investors. And basically, it needs to bet on the team and the team leadership versus the actual product going into market. For each of you, can you share a founder experience that you've had working with a founder who has made a really successful company or a successful business, and kind of what qualities set them apart from, the other horses that you maybe didn't bet on?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, there's been a couple where, it makes the due diligence process for us so much quicker and easier when we have kind of a couple founders that we know who, are serial entrepreneurs in a sense, but then can go on and build companies, within their respective fields. So, I mean, we have one in particular that we had exited from. It was a cardiovascular company. We're by no means medical device experts, but this person, went on and sold his first company. We were fortunate to get in on the second. Made several follow-on investments, and he turned it around and sold it to a large corporation, which was great for us. And then now he's in another company, and it seems like a great technology. Again, we're not really, it's another cardiovascular company, and we're not really experts in that. But at the same time, we can rely on his credibility, what he's built in the past, and how we know that he operates, which for this person specifically is just a very, he's very disciplined, pragmatic, has a good approach, and he's really good at managing people. So that makes it easy for us. And I mean, we'll still do due diligence. We'll make sure that we understand the company. You know, and we'll ask some connections that we know the space better. But at the end of the day, that's one where we have a high degree of confidence that we're going to make an investment in rather than, you know, passing on.
I kind of look for resilience. A few years ago, most of you probably remember when Silicon Valley Bank melted down. There was about a 24-hour period where nobody knew what was going to happen. We have a large number of companies in portfolio, but two kind of come to mind because they had 100% of their capital, our capital, in Silicon Valley Bank. And remember, everybody was one yeah, and so one CEO immediately contacting the board, you know, was going to fly to Palo Alto to actually go to Silicon Valley Bank, right, to actually try and be there. Totally proactive with communication of the board. The other CEO was sort of just a meltdown almost, right? It was horrible. So when we were thinking about, like, why two companies, similar stage, different reactions to a crisis. The one CEO did great, was an ex-triathlete. I think resilience, and it was like, yeah, this sucks, but I'm going to do what I can. I don't know. That's sort of an X factor that you look for in CEOs in particular.
Yeah, so Hill, you've had some interesting experiences as well. Do you want to share about a company you've worked with that has, you know, maybe challenged you or changed the way you think about entrepreneurship?
Sure. I think piggybacking off of some of the other responses here, I think it's often the more challenging or difficult situations where you really see what someone's made out of. And, there's a serial founder I'd worked with on several ventures previously, and for his most recent one, it looked like he had a really great idea. The company was coming into fruition around 2020, 21, when the recruiting market was very high or riding a high. As COVID kind of went on, it looked like a lot of things had changed overnight as far as some of the assumptions they had made as far as how their business would be run and how this was going to go. And I think what really stood out to me was how transparent his communication was the moment that trouble started to hit. He was very direct, very succinct, made sure he made us feel very comfortable working with him and understanding these are the headwinds that we're facing, and this is how we plan to assuage some of those concerns. And even when those things started to go perhaps less their way, I think it was really working with them in tandem to help them find a safe landing when they were eventually acquired. And I think him building that rapport also from the other side of the table with the buyer really helped assuage a lot of those concerns as well. So I think really how you hold your cards, even if sometimes timing or the market might come down to crush you, really can be an advantage in your own hand in terms of building a solid reputation, being known to be ethical and high integrity, but also tackling things head on rather than hoping that they lay, for someone else to find during due diligence, or worse, post-close, and then you have a whole new acrimonious relationship with that new team or new buyer. And so I really think how you do business is a testament to who you are. And I think, even today, many of you are standing in this room and taking the initiative to be here. I really think it sends a message in terms of how you reach out, connect with people thereafter, and continue that path forward.
Yes, my next question is for the audience. Again, just to kind of reset the room. I asked you, started a company and a lot of hands went up. How many entrepreneurs in the room have raised capital for the business? And this could be small checks, big checks, angels. Keep those hands up high. Let's see. All right, and keep your hands up. How many people in the room have raised money for a nonprofit cause or for any other organizations outside of business? So everyone, or not everyone, but like 90% of the room has had some sort of fundraising experience. So you know what it's like asking people for money. That's one of the founders' key jobs, is asking investors for money and then asking their next investors for money. The other question that I have for the panel today is behind the capital and ask, what types of partnerships or what types of services do each of your firms offer besides just the money, Jackson? You talked about a shoulder to cry on when Silicon Valley Bank was going down. We experienced that at PS27 Ventures too, where some of our portfolios were currently in the middle of raising capital. They were so busy, they didn't know that they didn't have a bank anymore. So we had to call up our bank on that Friday. It was a busy Friday at the office. And we said, hey, get ready, because at 8 a.m. the next day, our startups are moving their money to your bank. So we had to kind of step in as a service partner, as an extended member of the team, so that we didn't have our founders, flying out to California or crying on the floor that they woke up and their bank account says zero. I even called the Silicon Valley Bank number that day just to see what the customer service was looking like, and it was just a deadline. It was a scary day to be a Silicon Valley Bank banker. But circling back to the question, what kind of services do you guys offer? What kind of mentoring do you offer to the startup teams you invest in?
Yeah, I know that example, one of the Deep Work LPs is a community bank CEO. And so we were able to get him immediately involved and start moving money, as we need to. I mean, so when you're, look, you need money, at the end of the day, if you're desperate, you'll take it from wherever you can get it. But ideally, you're taking it from investors that bring more than just capital. They bring service providers. They help you with recruiting. They bring some sort of industry knowledge to the board, right? So kind of if you can get the money and the right investors, it's can be immensely valuable. A lot more important than often than valuation. So when you're evaluating term sheets on the entrepreneur side, it's not just valuation or cap on a note or whatever. It's like who is putting this money in and how much value are they going to bring to this enterprise going forward. So you have to factor that.
Yeah, I mean, most investors that are going to come on your cap table, hopefully will have a deep network that they can, as a conduit, provide access for you to, depending on what you're doing, and really kind of help funnel you to the right people so you can get set up. I think, a lot of investors also are fortunate to have experience seeing a lot of different companies. They've seen a lot of pitches and they've seen a lot of structure. So, one of the big things that's important as you're growing your company is like governance and making sure that you're properly like tracking your like all of the kind of like underlying administration, right? So, it can, they can flag it pretty quickly if you're just not doing something right, because as your company progresses, it becomes more and more of a problem if you want to get acquired and a company wants to see wants to go through a due diligence process and you just have nothing that is really reliable to look at for them. Can really they still might be interested, but they're gonna give you a haircut rather than if you're you're organized.
I've always loved where the rubber hits the road, especially on the go-to-market side. My first job in venture was really working with a lot of companies at the early stages on the investing side in terms of determining what companies to invest in, but also spending a lot of time with a number of companies in the Fortune 500, those executives figuring out what tech gaps and pain points they had. And I did this across a number of legacy industries, whether it was banking, insurance, supply chain, logistics, and commerce. So I love rolling up my sleeves a lot here and helping a lot of the companies who are selling an enterprise figure out how do we do it, who are we targeting, how do we build repeatability into those motions and scale up. I also loved that a lot of our LPs have stepped up and have offered introductions or have done pilots, POCs, and really mentored some of our companies, whether they're selling into B2B or trying to be a conduit for them in consumer and think around how do they scale up some of their own go-to-market strategies there or get clever, be it through UGC or other social media tactics.
Yeah, how do we do it? And I know that is a question that a lot of members of this audience are also asking. I know quite a few of us have been inspired by Pablo and Justice at 161 Group, raising their own funds, starting their own VC firm. I give a round of applause to you guys. And a lot of us are venture curious. So how do we get a job in VC today? Raise your hand if you're thinking about a career or a job working in venture capital. So a good number of hands are up there too. So maybe share how you got your job and what should we do tomorrow to get started on finding a career in VC?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different avenues that you can take. I mean, I think the traditional avenue is like kind of like a high finance route where you go work for some like an investment bank or an M&A firm, or like a private equity company if you're lucky enough to get in on one of those positions. They're very very highly sought after. So I think some of the like other ways, obviously being a founder, I think gives you a bit of a leg up if you can build an expertise and you can really understand what it's like to build a business. I think I've seen a lot of other VCs obviously who they one day become venture capital investors once they've previously been founders. Sometimes have exited, but no matter what, they have the experience of actually doing it. And I think there's other routes as well. I mean, I was in a consulting role, and then I just kind of like worked hard and demonstrated value in a role that I could grow up into. So, I got lucky in that respect. But, I think a lot of it is just like staying focused and, all of the, cliches of being young, just like working hard and finding a way to add value and then kind of keeping your eye on the target. I want to work in VC, so this is the steps I have to take to get there. I need to work hard. I need to, understand the industry and then understand what adds value to investors or someone that I either want to go work for, or, whether I want to, be an investor myself.
So network, I would say, right? I mean, that's how anybody gets hired for the most part. So who is introducing you to the partners at the fund, and so that's in some ways as a student though, I think one of the other panels may have mentioned this, like you do have a superpower. If there's gators that are in venture funds, I'd be reaching out to them for internships and, mentoring and whatever, right? To get yourself out there. I mean, my pathway to VC was I was a 4-time CEO with exits, and then I was going to do it a 5th time. My wife said, no way, it's way too stressful. So I'm like, well, what am I going to do with my life? So I switched over to the investor side.
Yeah, I'll just add to that too. I think there's a few different paths into it. I think for more junior roles, typically what I've seen is one of two things. Either you come from banking, consulting, or an operating role, or a mixture of all three for an analyst associate role. This is almost like a game of musical chairs. There's not many firms that are multi-stage, have a need for analysts and associates, and so it is a very competitive pool with that. But I think building domain expertise or at least a unique skill set, whether that's, hey, I know marketing better than anyone else in my demographic or in my space, or having a unique sales point, whether it's I really understand B2B sales, I was selling a lot of great software in this space, or I worked at one of the firm's portfolio companies and was the best performing rep. Something to that effect will really stand out. And I think it's really about drawing a narrative there. For myself, it was a number of cold emails, and I thought this would just be a great way to get a good vantage point coming out of school and seeing what the tech landscape was evolving into, and kind of ended up falling into a place where I kept coming back and forth between building companies and investing in them. But I really think it's about finding your own narrative within this, and don't be afraid to reach out to the online network and really think about who else resonates with your background, skills, or other companies you've interned or worked at.
Yeah, so thank you all to our panelists. I would highly recommend for the audience, connect with these investors on LinkedIn, learn more about their businesses, follow what they do. Oh, we've got questions from the audience. Let's do it.
We got a quick one here.
Bring it.
One question I do have is where with current global events going on, what are the challenges that with VC with investing in different companies? What sort of tips do you have for founders moving with this whole with everything going on in the future?
So I don't know that we're looking at deals particularly differently than we did a year ago. I mean, you're still looking at market opportunity, team, so I would say barring a catastrophic black swan event, I don't think things have changed that much. That could happen tonight, though. We don't really know, right? So I did have, I came from California here, and a friend of mine was going to take a company public just pre 9/11, and he was haggling with bankers over terms and everything, never got out, and a year later that company was gone. If he wouldn't have haggled and got greedy, in my opinion, right, and he would have got his company public, before 9/11, that company might have survived, right? So I think you need to be, if people are willing to write you a check, right, be careful about getting greedy on valuation, especially maybe to your point. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And then if a dirty bomb goes off in Manhattan tonight, nothing is going to happen, and who knows how long it's going to take. So and I don't think that would surprise anybody. So I would say if you got people willing to give you money today, and it's somewhat within reason, take the money.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Justice said this yesterday. The worst decision a lot of times is indecision. So if you get too hung up on things that are happening from a macro perspective as a founder and as like a business owner, that can really take a toll on how you're making decisions. So a lot of time, there were a lot of good companies that weathered the storm through COVID and just kept their head down and continued on their trajectory and are doing really well now. So I think it's just kind of keeping your head down and keeping your eye on the prize.
Yeah, lastly, I think that the only constant is change, and change will always be there. The tough thing here is that as the macro changes, more opportunities pop up. Look at defense, dual use, building for the physical world like robotics, or even looking at how SaaS might be cooked today, but there's a whole new set of agent substrates or ways to chase those opportunities or challenge how traditional software paradigms work. So there's always a new meta evolving.
I have a question mainly as a first-time founder, mainly because I'm new to the space. I'm trying to figure out and navigate how to properly navigate it. And one thing I'm curious about, and I've heard this, I'll say, like integrity, finding out the right people to speak to. But I'm curious to know, like, for those investors, not investors, for those founders that have no relative experience in the field and like asking for funding and figuring who to ask and how to properly do it. I come from like B2B sales background, and it's a lot of like cold emails, finding out like who's the right people to speak to, calling them, going to where they're at. Would you say like that same type of mindset is something that should be replicated when you are a founder trying to land funds, or is there another way to navigate it properly and effectively?
I'll hop in there. I think it's very similar to the B2B sales funnel in a way. I almost joke that being a VC analyst or associate almost mirrors that process identically. I think the same way that you build a top of funnel, really understand what funds you want to pitch, what are they investing in, look at Crunchbase, PitchBook, any of the resources you have access to, and really understand who's working with whom, what partners are really active in that space, if they're a multi-stage fund or multi-sector, and really hone in from there. The better the warm intro, the conduit to get in there, the more likely it converts. Portfolio company intros are some of my favorite because I've invested in them. They have a pretty good temperature read on what I like, and I'm in constant communication with them as well. But if you can't do that, a great cold email goes way better than a lukewarm intro.
Yeah, I think that's just to emphasize that if you're identify the venture firms that might make sense for your thing, go to look at their portfolio companies and try and get a meeting with some CEO inside that portfolio company, because I guarantee you every venture partner in a fund will return a call or respond to something that comes from a portfolio CEO. So I would try and pitch then and get in that way.
Yeah, and then just with continuing to learn, I mean, you're doing the right thing right now, right? Like, I think you responded to an email or like a Luma invite to come to this event. I feel like the more you put yourself out there and just meet people and network, the more you tend to like get lucky with some of those opportunities and meet the right person or meet someone that's 1 degree off from the right person.
Give it up one more time for the panel.